Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Easy Chat English podcast. I'm Amelia, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Ethan. How are you today, Ethan?
Hey, Amelia, I'm great. Feeling energized and ready to dive into today's topic. How about you?
Same here, and I think today's topic is something we can all relate to at some point or another, feeling bored. Ethan, when was the last time you felt bored?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I think it was last weekend. I had this long weekend with nothing planned, and by Saturday afternoon, I was just sitting on the couch feeling totally restless. You know, when you're not doing anything and time just drags?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's funny how boredom can make time feel like it's moving so slowly. For me, it was just yesterday, waiting in line at the bank. The process was so tedious, I felt like I was going to fall asleep right there.
Oh, I've been there. Waiting in line is a classic situation where boredom hits hard. You have nothing to do, and it's just this mind-numbing experience.
Let's start by talking a bit more about what boredom actually is. It's something we've all experienced, but have you ever stopped to think about what causes it?
Boredom usually happens when you have a lack of interest in what's going on around you, right? Everything feels dull or unstimulating, and you feel like there's nothing to do.
Exactly. Boredom can happen when things are too easy or repetitive and your brain isn't being challenged. It's like your mind is just idling, waiting for something interesting to come along.
I remember reading somewhere that boredom can actually be a good thing. It forces you to reflect and be creative. But most of the time, it just feels like time is standing still.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that later. The idea that boredom can have a positive side. But first, let's talk about some situations that make us feel bored. Ethan, besides waiting in line, what are some other situations where you tend to feel bored?
Well, one big one for me is sitting in traffic, especially when it's a long drive and you're just stuck there staring at the car in front of you. It's not like you can do anything to kill time.
Oh, that's a good one. Long car rides or even slow days at work can really make you feel like there's nothing stimulating going on. You end up feeling restless and counting the minutes until it's over.
Yeah, and sometimes I find that even on days when I have time off, like during a long weekend, I end up feeling bored. You'd think having nothing to do would be a good thing, but it just makes me feel idle and, well, bored.
That's so true. Sometimes when you have too much free time, it actually leads to boredom. It's like your brain needs something to focus on, or else you start feeling dull.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, an idle mind is the devil's playground. When you don't have anything to keep you busy, boredom sets in fast.
So let's talk about how people deal with boredom. Everyone has their own ways of trying to distract themselves, right?
Yeah, some people like to daydream or just scroll mindlessly through their phones. I have to admit, I've spent more time than I'd like to admit just binge-watching TV shows when I'm bored.
Oh, definitely. I think we're all guilty of that. Sometimes, when I'm bored, I just pull out my phone and start scrolling through social media. It's not the most productive way to pass the time, but it's easy, you know?
Yeah, but then you realize you've spent hours doing nothing and still feel restless. It's like you're bored, but you're also wasting time, which makes it worse.
Exactly. I think one of the best ways to deal with boredom is to do something productive, like pick up a new hobby or read a book. But that's easier said than done when you're in the middle of feeling bored.
You know, we often think of boredom as a bad thing, but it can actually be an opportunity. Sometimes boredom can lead to creativity.
Oh, absolutely. I read somewhere that some of the best ideas come from moments of productive boredom. When you have nothing else to do, your brain starts to get creative.
I totally agree. I remember one time I was bored out of my mind during a long flight. I had nothing to do, so I started jotting down some ideas, and that actually sparked a creative project I'm still working on.
That's such a good point. Boredom can give you the space to reflect and come up with new ideas. Sometimes we just need to unwind and let our minds wander.
Yeah, it's all about finding the balance between being bored and using that time to think or recharge. It's not always easy, but it can be rewarding.
Let's move on to some tips for overcoming boredom. What do you usually do when you're trying to break free from it?
One thing I always try to do is break the routine. If I feel bored, it's usually because I'm doing the same things every day. So I'll try something new, like going for a walk, starting a new hobby, or just doing something outside of my usual activities.
That's a great tip. For me, I like to get out of my comfort zone. Sometimes, even something as simple as learning a new recipe or starting a new book helps stimulate my mind.
Definitely. Another thing I try is to make sure I'm engaging in activities that are both fun and productive. It's important to find purpose in what you're doing, even if it's something small.
Exactly. When you have a goal or a purpose, it's much easier to stay interested and avoid that feeling of restlessness. And if all else fails, sometimes we just need to take a break and recharge. Now that we've talked about how to overcome boredom, let's share some personal stories of how boredom can lead to unexpected outcomes. Ethan, I think you have a funny one about something you did when you were bored, right?
Oh yes, definitely. So it was one of those rainy weekends where I had nothing to do. I had binge-watched everything on Netflix, scrolled through social media, and I just couldn't stand being idle anymore. So I decided, on a whim, that I was going to learn how to knit.
Knitting? That's a great idea. How did it go?
Well, here's the funny part. I had never knitted before, but I figured, how hard can it be? I watched a few YouTube tutorials, got some yarn, and went for it, but instead of making something cozy like a scarf, I ended up with this weird, twisted mess of yarn. I jokingly called it abstract knitting because it definitely wasn't wearable.
That's amazing. I love how you just went for it without worrying about the end result. It sounds like you had fun with it, even if it didn't turn out the way you expected.
Exactly. It was a total mess, but the process was so enjoyable. It actually made me realize that trying new things, even if they don't go as planned, can be a great way to deal with boredom. Now, whenever I'm bored, I'm more willing to experiment and have fun with it.
That's such a great attitude. Sometimes it's not about the outcome, but about the experience itself. Trying something out of your comfort zone can really make boredom more exciting. So, to wrap up today's episode, I think the key takeaway is that boredom is something we all experience, but it's also something we can turn into an opportunity. Whether it's finding ways to distract yourself, being productive, or just using the time to reflect, there's always a way to make the most of it.
Absolutely. And next time you're feeling bored, remember that it's okay to embrace that feeling for a little while. You never know, it might spark your next big idea.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us on the Easy Chat English podcast. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. And we'll catch you next time.
Take care, everyone. See you in the next episode.